Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. A lot of politics in the United States, but we're going overseas because the war fighting continues. The war fighting that connects to the massacre, the atrocity in Orlando, Florida. Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, are here to comment on the war fighting from the Hindu Kush to the Atlantic Ocean. Today, the Department of Justice changed its mind somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, first releasing a transcript of the 9/11 and other communications from the shooter in Orlando that was edited, and then, after remarks by the Speaker of the House and others, releasing the full transcript. There is a deal to learn from the full transcript. Not surprising, but to learn. And Tom's here to help us, and then we'll go to the Taliban and Iraq. Tom, a very good evening to you. The initial transcript edited out certain unusual phrases that were really not very revelatory. The complete transcript includes those phrases. The shooter aimed to connect his act to al-Baghdadi. What I have read, and I've not studied the manuscript as you have, but what I have read very much reminds me of ceremonial, cult-like statements that I've seen before from the Islamic State killers. Is that accurate, and what is the significance of these cult-like repetitions? Good evening to you, Tom.
Good evening, John. Well, this was a really bizarre day because earlier in the day, the FBI releases this partial transcript and a redacted timeline of events from the night of June 12th from when Omar Mateen opened fire at that club, of course, in Orlando, Florida. And the strange thing about the FBI's partial transcripts is they basically quoted Mateen during one of his 9/11 calls as saying, "I pledge allegiance to," and then it had in brackets the word omitted. And so everywhere there was the name Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi or the name of the group, the Islamic State, they just inserted brackets with the word omitted there. Now, this is really clumsy because everybody under the sun knows that he's referring to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and the Islamic State. FBI Director James Comey said this a week ago today on June, right the day after the attack on June 13th. He held a press conference saying that Mateen had pledged allegiance to Baghdadi. President Obama mentioned it during a press conference on June 14th. There have been probably 100 different press accounts of this. So the idea that they would redact these words out and put in omitted is just absurd. And so there was a firestorm of controversy in over a few hours where people were sort of offended by the absurdity. If you're going to release these transcripts, why would you block that out? It doesn't make any sense. And so then the Department of Justice and the FBI released a joint statement, not just the FBI now, but now DOJ gets involved, and the two of them together released a statement saying that here's basically the full, more complete version of the transcript with those words reinserted. Very, very bizarre, very strange. But the bottom line from all this, from our perspective, is, going back to 2013 now, we have evidence that Mateen was attracted to the jihadist ideology, first under al-Qaeda and then the Islamic State. There are now multiple data points saying that's the case. And, of course, much of the conversation in our country over the past week has been about his motivations. Look, as we argue, ideologues, including jihadists, are not automatons. There's not one thing that basically makes them do, everything in their life. Humans are complex beings that have multiple emotions and feelings and thoughts and the like. But the thing here about Omar Mateen is there's this consistent strain of jihadism throughout his life, and that's probably what tied him together right up to the end. And you mentioned these cult-like statements where he's pledging allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Well, this is exactly what the Islamic State tells followers to do. They want lone jihadists, individual jihadists in the West to commit terrorist attacks and say beforehand that they're doing it on behalf of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and the Islamic State, and they say you have to pledge bay'ah, which is the oath of allegiance to Baghdadi, to really make it carry weight. And they do this for a number of reasons, but what we're seeing out of the full transcripts and all the other evidence that comes out is that Omar Mateen did this probably at least 4 times the night of the attack. And that tells us that Omar Mateen was following the instructions the Islamic State has over and over again relayed to its followers.
Pledging allegiance to Baghdadi's name. Why do they want that said out loud? How does that help them? Is that a recruiting technique? Is that to make certain people follow through on the mass murder, Tom? What is your analysis of that?
John, Baya, the Oath of Allegiance, this is the essence of the Islamic State's caliphate claim. This is the essence of Baghdadi's ideological power. The whole ideology revolves around the idea that as the rightful ruler of the caliphate, that he's owed the Baya of all Muslims around the world. And so what they want individual or lone attackers in the West to do is to emphasize that Baya to Baghdadi, to show everybody that basically that's the right way to go, and that's what they should be doing as well.
This is at odds with how al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, and how it operates. So in these statements, was the shooter separating himself from Al-Qaeda? That's a point of dispute between them, correct? But Baghdadi's making claims that Al-Qaeda says he has no right to.
Yeah, I mean, Al-Qaeda doesn't believe that everybody owes their Baya or Oath of Allegiance to Baghdadi. Quite the opposite. They believe that Baghdadi is a counterfeit leader, basically, and that they should undermine him. But, you know, what we see with Omar Mateen, I think, with the evidence that's come out thus far, is sort of a typical pattern. You know, he was first, you know, flirting with the Al-Qaeda ideology and the stuff that Al-Qaeda was putting out about martyrdom and individual attacks in the West, and then he gravitated as the Islamic State became sort of, you know, the hot topic of the moment. He sort of gravitated that way. But I think none of that is inconsistent with his jihadist ideology or leanings. You know, over here in the West or elsewhere, the infighting between Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State is not necessarily as big a deal as it is over there. And so this is a guy who I think the evidence at hand right now is pretty convincing that this jihadist ideology wormed its way into his brain early on.
Bill, a very good evening to you. We go to the Taliban and the U.S. drone strike. The drone strikes continue against the Taliban. I'm not quite certain what the reasoning is now. Are they going to launch transnational attacks like Orlando? I don't think so. They're an indigenous, rebellious, cutthroat group. But in any event, it killed an emir. The Taliban is saying that this is inconsequential, doesn't bother them. Good evening to you, Bill.
Good evening, John. What the Taliban is saying, really, look, first of all, I hate to agree with jihadists of any stripes, but when they're right, they're right. What the Taliban said is that the West basically has failed to, quote unquote here, failed to understand the psychology of the Taliban. They're correct. What the Taliban is saying in this statement is, look, what we long to die while fighting for our cause. This is what we do. This is, you know, the Quran tells us that dying while fighting for the cause of Islam, this is their interpretation of it, is there's no greater honor. So by the West killing their leaders, that's not going to bring them to the negotiating table. That's not why the Taliban are fighting. The Taliban are saying, we're fighting to achieve our goals, and our goals are religiously or approved by, you know, the Quran, right? And so the Taliban is saying, go ahead and kill us. That's not going to weaken our resolve. It's not going to bring us to the negotiating table. You're giving us exactly what we want. We're going to continue fighting. Now, we could dismiss this as rhetoric, and it often is dismissed as Taliban rhetoric, but look at how they've operated over the last 15 years. There has been nothing that we have done militarily that is going to force them to come to the negotiating table. They are going to fight either to the bitter end or until they achieve victory. And why would the Taliban come to the table now? The greatest opportunity that we had to possibly get the Taliban to negotiate an end to the war would have been when we had the most troops in country and we were killing Taliban fighters by the thousands and targeting their leaders and whatnot. Well, that didn't bring them to the table then, so why should less troops in country and an occasional drone strike that kills a senior leader or two, why do we think that's going to bring them to the table?
You quote from the Taliban, in numerous places of the Holy Quran, Allah Almighty has described martyrdom as a holy blessing, so much so that Allah Almighty declared in one place to his creation that do not call those killed in the path of Allah as dead, for they are not dead but living, yet you know not, etc. So, Bill, what we're finding here is that the drone strikes are an argument, a case to join the Taliban. They're translating modern robot warfare into strength.
Yeah, well, what they're translating is, yes, that is essentially correct. What they're saying is, look, you may have the military means to kill us, but it doesn't matter. You're trying to take us off. Look, in my opinion, the strikes are only effective in the sense that they weaken the Taliban. They forced them to, or any group for this fact, they forced them to go through the issue of leadership change. It could create divisions. We've seen this happen over time with groups. But at the end of the day, if they're ideologically committed to the fight,
right,
killing a leader isn't going to do it. You're going to have to do something a lot more to take them out of the game.
Bill Roggio and Tom Joscelyn of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. They keep the Long War Journal. When we come back, we're going to Syria and Iraq. I'm John Batchelor.